The generation that spent their preteen years roughly between Star Trek and Star Wars might be nostalgic for a number of very strange things, like bell-bottom jeans and avocado-colored appliances. But while our telephones were tethered to the wall, we did enjoy some amenities that a modern child might not even recognize. For example, if your family was sojourning on the summer vacation in the station wagon, you might be lucky enough to stop at a road motel where you could purchase a bit of magic for the low, low price of 2 bits. The curious device, called Magic Fingers, is more than a nostalgic childhood memory or just a piece of 70s kitsch. The idea is much older than you might have thought, and the science is surprisingly sound. As the late, great Jimmy Buffett put it, put in a quarter, turn out the light. Magic Fingers makes you feel all right. The use of vibration therapy to treat a number of conditions is quite old. Health Europa explains that the ancient Greeks discovered activity and vibrations aided recovery from injury. Special carts with irregular wheels aimed to speed healing were mentioned by Lucius Annaeus Seneca in his writings. These were often run over uneven ground to increase the level of vibration and speed up the healing process. Dr. M.L.H. Arnold Snow described another method used by ancient Greeks in his 1904 book, Mechanical Vibration and Its Therapeutic Application. By wrapping one end of a saw in cotton fabric and applying it to the part to be treated, while on the uncovered part of the saw a piece of wood was sawed, thus mechanical vibration was transmitted to the part requiring treatment. Snow also cites a 16th century Japanese work called Sai Tu Hui that lists rigid muscles, spasmodic contractions, relief of rheumatic pains, and after the union of fractures as conditions amenable to mechanical vibration treatment. While the value of what is today generally called whole-body vibration therapy was recognized in antiquity, of course methods of mechanical vibration were somewhat limited in the pre-industrial age, with Snow mentioning, for example, a 17th century work that prescribed flagellation, percussion, and slapping. But technological developments offered better alternatives. In the 19th century, French doctor Jean-Martin Charcot developed a vibrating chair for the treatment of patients with Parkinson's disease. The chair, described in a 2017 edition of the journal European Neurology as a special mechanism that imparts rapid oscillatory movements around an anterior lateral axis, was powered by gas, steam, or electricity. Charcot's inspiration is one that has inspired vibration therapy throughout the ages. The Journal of Neurology notes in 2009 that he developed a vibration chair for patients with Parkinson's disease after he observed that patients were more comfortable and slept better after a train or carriage ride. While he reported improvements in his patients, he died before more thorough testing of the therapy could be done, and his vibration treatment was not continued. Numerous scientists and physicians experimented with different kinds of mechanical vibration devices for various conditions, but vibration therapy began to be seen as contributing to general health as well as a specific therapeutic treatment. Swedish physician Dr. Jonas Gustav Wilhelm Zander invented a number of machines for physical therapy that utilized different methods of providing mechanical resistance that were precursors of many modern gym machines. But he also recognized the value of vibration, and among his inventions was the Zander Apparat F2, which mimicked the vibration of riding on a horse. The fitness website Sidekick writes that he tested it on his patients and noted that his device helped stimulate weight loss and contributed to muscle gain. Zander's device had an impact on a legendary figure in the field of health, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. The website Biographics explains that Kellogg did not aspire to be a doctor in the traditional sense. Instead of treating illness, he wanted to help prevent it. Many of his treatments were decidedly non-traditional, including specific attitudes about diet. While it was his younger brother Will who would create the eponymous company, it was Dr. John who pioneered the idea of healthy grain breakfast cereals. The Kellogg brothers turned a facility called the Western Health Reform Institute into the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which Biographic describes as part resort, part medical facility, and part retreat for the rich and famous. Outfitted with all the equipment he could possibly need to get patients in tip-top shape, the sanitarium drew famous guests such as Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, Warren Harding, Booker T. Washington, Sojourner Truth, and Amelia Earhart. However, the good doctor's treatments were not exactly traditional, including Biographic writes the Sanctum Sanctorium, which was filled with, and yes, this was a real thing, enema machines. Each machine was capable of pumping 15 quarts of water, you know where, in just a single minute. If there's anything that will encourage you to reach for a high-fiber cereal, it's that. But a rear end was not the only route that the doctor used to cleanse the body of toxins. He used light therapy and mild electrical currents, which, Biographic explains, were applied with the help of a device he made himself from a telephone. And not surprisingly, he also applied the ancient therapy of mechanical vibration. Biographics explains, the sanitarium was filled with devices that would shake, vibrate, slap, and even beat patients to various ends. Some were designed to stimulate the bowels, others were thought to help improve circulation. Health Europa writes, Kellogg invented vibrating chairs, bars, and platforms, and used them in his Battle Creek Sanitarium for therapeutic measures. The first generation was steam-powered, could deliver whole-body vibration therapy to up to 5 individuals. Among his devices was an improved version of Xander's Xanderapparat, a mechanical horse that gained a particularly noteworthy fan. The Daily Hampshire Gazette reported in 2018. Thunderbolt was a gift to President Calvin Coolidge from his college classmate Dwight Morrow, who presented it to his friend after the president, who loved to ride real horses, was prevented from doing so by the Secret Service that was concerned about his safety in the increasingly urban Washington area. The Washington Post wrote in 2018 that newspaper readers soon learned that Coolidge rode 3 times a day, first thing in the morning, just after lunch, and when his work was finished. The electric horse was good for the liver and could help its rider lose weight, Coolidge's doctor asserted. Although a 1927 edition of the Indianapolis Times noted that the Prince of Wales had a mechanical camel that was, experts say, much better than Coolidge's mechanical horse. In 1938, the United Press reported that what had become called Cal's Hoss had been moved to a gymnasium in Washington where it was shaking the fat off a lot of new dealers. Some of the biggest men in Washington ride Cal's Hoss regularly, Professor E.O. Peterson, proprietor of the club, told the UP. They are enthusiastic about it. Given the application of vibration therapy to everything from broken bones to weight loss to stimulating the bowels, it's not a surprise that there's a long history of applying vibration to sleep. The New York Times reported in 2009. The earliest vibrating beds predated the Industrial Revolution and were powered by household servants. Then came steam power, and after that, electricity. It isn't clear exactly who had the idea of a vibrating bed that would show up in a hotel room, but in 1951, an electrical engineer named John V. Henderson patented what he called a reciprocating bed. A 1950 edition of the Birmingham, Alabama News explains that Henderson's inspiration came 30 years previously, after the birth of their first child left Mrs. Henderson unable to leave her bed. Doctors instructed the young husband that he must continually massage his wife's back if he'd ever want her to be well again, the news explains. I was in the Navy, Henderson told the news. Uncle Sam would not permit me to remain on perpetual leave just to massage my wife's back. The distraught husband got the idea that if the bed vibrated, it would solve the problem. He bought all kinds of electric vibrators and attached them to the bed, but none would work. In time, Mrs. Henderson recovered and was on her feet again, and the idea of a vibrating bed remained an idea. But, the news reports, a year ago, while in a Huntsville hotel, the idea came back. Mr. Henderson was on his way back from a business trip, and suddenly he says, there it was. I'm sure the good Lord pointed it out to me. After much tinkering, Henderson designed a bed that, the Associated Press reported, is operated by a small electric motor connected with an off-center pulley. Henderson, an engineer, the Associated Press wrote, makes no claims for his souped-up bed, but has a standing invitation to doubting Thomases to take a nap in it. A reporter from the Birmingham News tied the apparatus. You close your eyes. You try to think, but you can't. You wonder about the picture you'll take, but you don't care. How strange that all the problems of the little world about you suddenly seem so unimportant. Somewhere far off, there's the click of a switch. The bed has stopped vibrating, and the feeling you have is that you are floating off on air, and all you want to do is sleep, and sleep, and sleep. The news cites examples of a neighbor's wife who is now able to relax and sleep peacefully for the first time in years, and a doctor's wife whose high pulse was knocked down to 25 points, as well as Mrs. Henderson, who told the paper, I'm a very nervous person. Nothing has been able to quiet my nerves. The bed is doing it now. It is just a wonderful sleep stimulant. And all that sounds pretty good, but the vibrating bed did have its issues. Enter Mr. John Joseph Hufftelling. Born on November 14th, 1916, in Kansas City, Missouri, the New York Times reported in 2009 that Hufftelling held a series of jobs, among them hotel bellman, cookware salesman, and a salesman of a remote-control lawnmower. Hufftelling served in the Army Air Corps in World War II, where he flew 20 missions, and was recalled to service again during the Korean War. The Los Angeles Times reports that in 1958, Huff-Tailing devised the Magic Fingers machines after he was hired to sell a combination mattress and box spring with a pre-installed vibrating mechanism. The beds didn't sell very well and were far too expensive, but he thought he saw a way to shake quarters out of motel guests. The New York Times explained in 1963, making a better mousetrap, that is, product, isn't the only way to stir up new and significant business. Another way is to take what is usually an expensive item, strip away the frills and unnecessary attachments, and sell it at a greatly reduced price and a nice profit. The idea of a vibrating chair or bed is not new, the Time writes. The price, however, has precluded sales on a mass basis. A bed in which a vibrator is an integrated part retails for up to $1,000, depending on how elaborate the entire sleeping unit is. Instead, Huff-Tailing's company manufactured devices that are attached to a bed or chair springs and spread vibrations uniformly through a surface area. By manufacturing just the device and letting consumers attach it to their own chair or bed, the Times reports that Magic Fingers consumer units were priced at just $39.95. Huff-Tailing told the Times, "I used to sell the entire vibrating bed. One day I made a service call on a bulky bed, and after ripping away the frills, I found out that it was the vibrator that counted, not the bed. Magic Fingers was born then and there." Huff-Tailing patented his vibrator on May 22, 1962. Magic Fingers are sold through franchise dealers to institutional clients such as hotels and beauty salons. The devices could be bought or leased. The Los Angeles Times explains, by feeding a quarter into a machine, motel guests could purchase about 15 minutes of shaking, a curious luxury that surely enticed children traveling with their parents, said Ed Watkins, editor of Lodging Hospitality magazine. It was probably the first guest room amenity after the TV, and almost ubiquitous in motels in the 1960s and into the 1970s, Watkins told the Times on Friday. The New York Times explained that while the vibrators offer a pleasing sensation similar to weightlessness, no special medical or therapeutic value is claimed. It is said, though, that they are of aid in getting to sleep. While the Times wrote in 2009 that Magic Fingers combined the thrill of a carnival ride with the pleasure of what could be accomplished, sleeping or waking on a motel bed, for making no claim to therapeutic value, the Lincoln, Nebraska Star-Journal wrote in 1978 that the state revenue department ruled Friday that the beds are not mechanical jukeboxes and pinball machines, which are subject to a $15 annual state license fee. Instead, Tax Commissioner Bill Peters told the paper, the primary use of a vibrating bed is therapeutic and not as a game, contest, or amusement. The article, headlined "Vibrating Beds in Motel Rooms Are Not for Fun," noted the spokesman aloud, however, that the ruling is potentially humorous. The New York Times reported in 1963 that sales of Magic Fingers have risen from less than $100,000 in 1960, through the first full year of operation, to more than $1 million last year. Based on a 200% increase in sales since last May, Magic Fingers expects a volume of about $3 million in 1963. American Heritage Magazine reported in 2002 that at the height of their popularity, 250,000 Magic Fingers were in place in hotels across the country. The Miami News reported in 1971, since the firm's been in business 12 years, Huff-Tailing estimates Magic Fingers easily have been used more than 100 million times. People just like it because it relaxes them. The news continues. Huff-Tailing calculates 4 quarters a month are used in each of the 250,000 motel rooms carrying Magic Fingers. That's $12 million a year. And some of those quarters were mine. The New York Times noted in 2009, Magic Fingers has insinuated itself into the consciousness of a great many Americans over 40. Columnist Tom Phillips wrote in the Glen Falls New York Post-Star in 1990, summer vacations what meant staying at a roadside motel with a Gideon Bible in the nightstand, a shower cap in the bathroom, and Magic Fingers in the bed. For 2 bits, the bed would buzz, the kids would giggle, and soon another day on the road would be over. Columnist Blake Fontenay wrote in the Stuart, Florida News in 2022, during their heyday in the 1960s and 70s, the vibrating beds were considered prized amenities across the country, along with color televisions and heated pools. For a meager price of $1.25, the bed promised a quarter hour of tingling relaxation and ease. As a kid growing up during that era, I viewed those vibrating beds as the height of luxury. Although not everyone was a fan. Toronto Star columnist Joy Slinger wrote in 1983, sure, you can quote statistics that on a per-night slept basis, Magic Fingers is among the safest ways to go Betty buys. But what if my number happens to be up the night I put a quarter in the slot? Machines have been known to go berserk. You see it in the paper all the time. Machine goes to berserk. Kills man. It is a risk I prefer not to take. But the magic time was brief. The Palm Beach Post wrote in 2002, the short, happy reign of magic fingers came to a close in the late 1970s, done in by changes in the hospitality industry, vandalism, and growing association with the seedier side of life. The New York Times noted in 2009, by the early 1980s, magic fingers had begun to fall out of favor with hotel owners. By the standards of the late 20th century in-room entertainment, the device seemed quaint. Phillips observed that somewhere during the evolution of America's travel habits, magic fingers started to lose their grip on the vacationing public. One by one, motels dropped the devices. These days, even some motel industry officials raised their eyebrows at the term. Bill Poland, a general manager and vice president of operations for Holiday Inn on Hutchinson Island, told the Palm Beach Post, a typical Holiday Inn is an upgraded product from a Holiday Inn 30 years ago. Now you don't sell a room for $100 and ask them to put a quarter in a machine in their room. Palm Beach Post reported that Hufftailing sold the company in 1980. In 2002, the Palm Beach Post wrote that the 86-year-old Hufftailing was living on a 51-foot boat named Magic Fingers in the Fort Pierce Marina. But even today, he hears from past users on his creation who have stories to tell him about Magic Fingers. The Post wrote, one couple told him that their Magic Fingers didn't work at their California hotel, so they went to sleep and forgot about it. And in the middle of the night, it suddenly came on, and the couple thought they were in an earthquake. Hufftailing told the Post, people would also say, you owe me a quarter, it didn't work. I always had to carry a handful of quarters. Sadly, the Magic Fingers was lost in Hurricane Francis in 2004. The Stuart News reported in 2022. John Hufftailing remained in Fort Pierce after losing his boat, living in a couple of places, before dying of a brain hemorrhage in 2009. Fontenay noted ironically that the mayor of Fort Pierce told him in 2022 that she had never heard of him. Hufftailing died the same year as singer Michael Jackson and politician Ted Kennedy, he writes, although the inventor's passing drew considerably less attention. However, in perhaps the greatest honor to his memory, his son Paul told the New York Times that most of Mr. Hufttailing's children have magic fingers in their homes. And while he, and for the most part hotel rooms with his invention, are a thing of the past, the memories of his magic live on. ABC News wrote, while noting his passing in 2009, kitschy and titillating, magic fingers remained a staple of American pop culture even after the device began disappearing from motels. The vibrations triggered a beer explosion in the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and FBI agents Mulder and Scully relaxed to the pulsations in an episode of The X-Files. Fox News Channel's Brit Hume sang the Buffett lyric to former President George W. Bush and his father in a January interview when they mentioned a vibrating chair in the Oval Office. For never claiming any therapeutic effects, Hufftailing was certainly on the right track. A 2017 edition of the Journal of Healthcare Engineering notes that in the running of cars and trains, passengers often feel sleepy, and if a machine can reproduce that phenomenon, then it is possible to induce a patient, like an insomnia patient or an infant, to sleep with no ill side effects. The article concludes that the study results show that effective vibration can induce sleep. And isn't that worth a quarter? So today you can buy a unit for your home from magicfingers.us for about $80, and there are still a few hotel rooms out there that have units, mostly boutique hotels that are selling a vintage experience. But if you happen to have encountered a working Magic Fingers machine lately, then feel free to tell us when and where in the comments. If you go downtown in nearly any city in the world, you're going to see a lot of lights. Almost since the invention of the light bulb, enterprising advertisers have used lights to sell things. And for a good time in the 20th century, one kind of light seemed to be used to sell things more than almost any other: neon. Neon lights, of course, still exist today, though aren't used perhaps as much as they were in their heyday when they dominated places like Las Vegas's famous Strip. And of course, they say the neon lights are bright on Broadway. For a time, neon lights seemed to define city life, for good or ill, perhaps more than almost anything else. Neon itself is a gas that's present in small amounts in virtually every breath that you take. And the surprising history of neon lights deserves to be remembered. The story of neon begins with Scottish chemist William Ramsay. Born in 1852, he apprenticed to a shipbuilder before deciding to study chemistry at the University of Glasgow. He studied in Germany before becoming a principal of the University College of Bristol in 1879. In 1887, he became the chair of chemistry at University College, London. In 1894, began working with John William Strutt, Lord Rayleigh, on a question about the density of nitrogen in the air. In August of that year, Ramsay reported that he discovered a new component of air, which seemed to have no chemical reactivity. He named this new gas argon, from the Greek word meaning lazy. In 1895, looking for argon, he successfully isolated helium. His interest sparked, Ramsay began working with Morris Travers on research into air. They began their research using liquid air that has been cooled to incredibly low temperatures. They evaporated most of the air off to isolate possible trace elements. They identified one of the least volatile remnants as another new element, krypton, from ancient Greek kryptos, the hidden one. A week later, on June 7, 1898, they extracted another new substance. Its emission spectrum was new, leading the pair to believe that they had discovered yet another element. They put the new gas into a vacuum tube and threw a switch to send an electrical charge through the trapped gas. The two scientists became the first people to see neon light when the gas burst into incandescence. Travers wrote that the blaze of crimson light from the tube told its own story. It was a sight to dwell upon and never forget. Shortly after its discovery, Ramsay's son Willie came to the lab to see argon. "What are you going to call it?" Ramsay asked his son. "I should call it novum," Willie answered. "I think we had better go to the Greek. Call it neon," Ramsay supposedly said, and a name was born. A few months later, Ramsay and Travers discovered one more of the noble gases, xenon, named after the Greek word for stranger. Ramsay and Lord Rayleigh were both awarded Nobel Prizes in 1904 for their work discovering an entirely new group of elements, of which no single representative had been known with any certainty. The discovery and history of the other noble gases is also relevant to neon in its use as a light. Naturally, neon grows orange-red, while argon flows purple and krypton white. In the creation of neon signs, an enormous number of colors can be produced by combining different gases with fluorescent coatings. Neon signs are something of a misnomer, as neon is only used in about 1/3 of the colors, and many more use argon along with mercury. The tubes that Ramsay used in his discovery were Geissler tubes, invented in 1857 by Heinrich Geissler. The tube is sealed and has a metal electrode at each end, allowing an electrical current to flow through the tube, causing the gases inside to fluoresce. Geissler tubes were the first gas discharge tubes and were mass-produced in the 1880s as novelty devices. Some were elaborate and complex, and others could be spun with a motor. The tubes were improved upon in the 19th century by various scientists and used broadly in scientific investigation. Daniel McFarland Moore, an American electrical engineer, developed the Moore lamp, the first commercially available light source based on gas discharge instead of incandescence like Edison's light bulb. Moore developed his light by 1896, compensating for the slow loss of gas by introducing a valve which could automatically refill the tube as gas ran out. Moore's tubes used nitrogen and carbon dioxide instead of neon. Though expensive, he did have modest success in the first decade of the 20th century, as his gas lights were much brighter than contemporary incandescent bulbs. Dr. Pearlie G. Nutting of the Optics Division of the U.S. Bureau of Standards created a neon sign that used 4 glass tubes of neon, forming the letters N-E-O-N, that was displayed at the Palace of Electricity at the Louisiana Purchase Exhibition in 1904, a decade and a half before neon signs were available commercially. While the claim is disputed, some consider that to have been the first neon sign. At the time, neon was still too rare an element on Earth for commercial purposes. The solution, however, was on its way from Paris, courtesy of French engineer Georges Claude. Claude had developed a new system for liquefying air. His new system was able to produce an incredible quantity of liquid nitrogen, oxygen, and argon, as well as neon, essentially as a byproduct. He formed a company called Air Liquide to sell these gases. Claude was inspired by Geissler tubes and inventions like Moore's and began seeking a way to exploit the neon produced by air liquefaction. His first demonstration was at the Paris Motor Show in December 1910. Here he showed the public several 30-foot-long bright red neon tubes, which lit a large section of the Grand Palais. A paper at the time declared immense success for George Claude's red light. The neon tubes triumphed yesterday. In 1912, M. de Beaufort, working for Claude, came up with the idea of making the glass tubes thinner, which helped make them more malleable and the electrodes smaller, allowing for the light's commercial breakthrough. They could now be more easily shaped into letters. His neon appeared at Luna Park, a Paris amusement park, and then later for a celebration of Mark Normandy's 1000th birthday. Possibly the first neon sign appeared at a large new Paris hair salon in 1913. Neon advertising bloomed after that, with some 160 businesses adorning their fronts with a brilliant light by 1914. And by 1927, there were over 6,000 neon advertisements. Claude was a self-promoter and inventor, sometimes called the Edison of France, and he had perfected neon lighting by sealing the glass tubes completely, thus eliminating any need for Moore's refilling valves. Advertising using lights was not a new idea. In 1881, William Hammer said that he constructed the first electric sign ever made when he put up a sign in the Crystal Palace that flashed the name Edison by means of a huge lever in over 100 bulbs. In the 1890s, Heinz constructed a huge gherkin in New York City made up of green light bulbs, and 250,000 bulbs up and down 3 sides of the Eiffel Tower were a huge advertisement for Citroën cars. Neon signs crossed the pond to the U.S. in the 1920s. The common story for their first appearance is that of an L.A. car dealer, Earl C. Anthony. He purchased 2 signs for his Packard dealership in 1923, although there's no conclusive evidence of the sign's installation at that time. A Packard sign does appear in L.A. by 1925. Claude's company had a near monopoly on the production, protected by a patent issued in 1915. By the end of the 1920s, gas station signs shone in neon, and in Pittsburgh, a huge Frigidaire neon fridge opened and closed its door all night. In 1931, the mayor of Los Angeles turned on the largest neon sign of its time, the Olympic rings, in brilliant neon. By 1930, neon signs decorated streets in Tokyo, Mexico City, Melbourne, Wellington, and Shanghai. The end of Prohibition in the U.S. in 1933 brought even more neon to the streets, advertising what else? Beer. In 1934, 20,000 neon advertisements went up in Manhattan and Brooklyn. It proliferated even during the Depression, as neon signs were cheap to buy and maintain and represented cutting-edge, glitzy technology for the time. The thin glass tubes were malleable and could be made into nearly any shape. Los Angeles Times newspaper boys even wore aprons with flashing neon on them in 1936. Claude maintained his monopoly by selling the rights to use his patented electrodes to companies all over the world and offering those that did discounts on the gases to light their new lights. Claude Neon in the U.S. was a household name, and signs for Coca-Cola, Lucky Strike, and Standard Oil were all lit by his subcontractors. They even decorated churches. Claude's magazine quoted happy customers. The sign's dignity, attractiveness, and its visibility have been commented upon favorably. One hotel owner in Chicago declared that I now believe in signs, and added that he believes sincerely that it's actually bringing us in an additional revenue of $50 a day. Although it was primarily an advertising tool, making neon signs was more art than assembly line. When Claude's patent expired, thousands of craftsmen started working with glass tubes for neon. The glass was all handcrafted, blown by mouth, and shaped by hand into unique fonts and designs. Unfortunately for Claude, history did not look upon him kindly because during the war he was an ardent and outspoken Nazi collaborator. After the liberation of France in 1944, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was released in 1950, but died largely either despised or forgotten in 1960. But neon went on without him. In Manhattan, Eddie's Glass and Neon Institute taught generations of advertising artists. Technical books appeared to teach those who couldn't attend or apprentice. Signs could be constructed by anyone who has the mechanical ability and intelligence to apply his knowledge. At the time, the future of neon artists was bright, and the difficulties of transporting the heavy glass made one book boldly claim that it is very probable that each small town will have its own local neon shop. Neon spread everywhere. In rural 1928 Montana, a man called the fire department, certain that Missoula was on fire. The fireman assured him that it was just the new neon sign at the Florence Hotel. In the 1930s, the greatest center of neon was in Times Square. There, 300 neon advertisements could be seen at once, a rainbow ravine of color. Before neon, there'd already been countless lights in the square, but neon brought more. Switching mechanisms simulating movement appeared. In 1928, the New York Times announced with flashing bulbs that Herbert Hoover had won the presidency. In 1936, Wrigley's put up an enormous 25 by 60 meter sign that weighed over 100 tons and used nearly 30,000 light bulbs and 300 meters of neon tubes. Advertisers worked to outdo each other, always bigger and more spectacular. 700 meters of neon tube displayed a clown throwing rings in 57 images. Mice danced atop a whale's spout. In 1941, Camel Man, lit in neon, blew actual steam rings over the city. Though a worldwide phenomena, Times Square helped make neon iconically American. In 1933, the 100th anniversary for Chicago's founding, titled A Century of Progress, used 20,000 meters of neon light. The outside lighting alone amounted to 2.1 billion lux, a measurement of luminance. But neon's reputation couldn't last forever. In 1947, acclaimed author Nelson Algren released The Neon Wilderness, a book of short stories set in the urban realities of cities like Chicago, focusing not on the brilliance of neon, but the underprivileged poor that lived on the streets beneath it. In It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey's nightmare of his home without him is full of neon. Neon began to take on a darker tone, symbolism inspired by very real changes. Plastic and plexiglass started to replace neon as the choice for advertisers after World War II, and neon signs started wearing out and breaking down, often without repair. Inner cities and the poor businesses that couldn't afford the new sign technology became low class as the wealthy moved to the suburbs. In 1948, an LA Times headline read, "Skid Row flares as gaudy nightmare in neon lights." Neon signs of nude women, of girls, 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 alcohol, and pornography became predominant, while the once majestic and carefully crafted advertising signs wore out and were replaced or left broken. In the ritzy suburb of Bel Air, neon signs were banned. At the same time, the capital of neon moved across the country, to Las Vegas. While neon declined nationally, it blossomed in Las Vegas in the 1950s. Vegas Vic, a 15-meter-tall neon cowboy, looked over the city starting in 1951, while casinos turned into madly bright neon wonderlands. It was neon's last shot at glamour, immortalized in countless works of fiction and art. In Vegas, neon reached new heights of spectacle and, to some, vulgarity. Two reporters called Vegas a grotesque Disneyland. Caesar's Palace opened in 1966. It was the first of a new strategy in Vegas which focused on a new kind of spectacle, the kind that led to the replica Eiffel Tower and Luxor's Pyramid and Sphinx. Neon became a symbol of nostalgia, too, ringing 1940s and 50 diner restaurants, becoming kitsch. Neon was old news. In the 50s, there were 40 neon producers in Philadelphia still making tubes. By 1989, there were only 6, most old enough to retire. The art of neon was dying. But even as neon signs became harder to find, mostly just those partially broken signs that adorn dive bars and city hotels, neon as an art form has started to experience something of a renaissance. As neon signs were removed all over the country, artists and architects started to cry foul, and a movement to save these advertisements as pieces of art began. Design historian Alan Hess declared them an outdoor museum of American popular culture. Now some are being restored and remembered instead of tossed aside. Today there are neon sign museums, for example the Neon Museum in Las Vegas. In a cyclical way, to some extent, neon is becoming new again. And neon has certainly had its enduring impact on culture. A 2019 edition of the magazine The Atlantic proclaims that neon is the ultimate symbol of the 20th century. In his 2012 book, L'Être le Néon, or The Being and the Neon, philosopher Louis de Miranda opines, when you hear the word neon, an image pops into our heads, a combination of light, colors, symbols, and glass. The image is itself a mood. It carries an atmosphere. It speaks of the essence of cities, of the poetry of night, of the 20th century. There are many facets to history, and one of the hardest to get a grasp on is culture. You know, we spent a lot of time talking about things like what was the most popular song or most popular movie at a particular time. But how do you rank things like fashion or entertainment or trends alongside things like politics and economics and war? Are the things we like nothing more than fleeting fancies, side notes to history, or are they something more? The history of a weird pink plastic lawn ornament might say more about us than you would imagine. There are 6 extant recognized species of the genus Phenacopterus, 4 distributed in the Americas and 2 native to Afro-Eurasia. They are commonly called flamingos, a word derived from the Portuguese or Spanish meaning flame-colored. They are filter feeders with the unique shape of the bills structured to filter mud and silt from their food, which includes shrimp and algae. And despite appearances, the birds are not naturally pink. The U.S. National Zoo explains that as a flamingo dines on algae and brine shrimp, its body metabolizes the pigments, turning its feathers pink. And, of course, they offer an interesting enigma, as described by Matt Walker, editor of Earth News at BBC in 2009. It is one of the simplest but most enigmatic mysteries of nature. Just why do flamingos like to stand on one leg? The question is asked by zoo visitors and biologists alike, but while numerous theories abound, no one has yet provided a definitive explanation. But of the oddities of the flamingo, none is perhaps more odd than the lesser recognized seventh flamingo species, Phenacopterus rubber plasticus, that, while widely distributed worldwide, originates from a single breeding ground, Leominster, Massachusetts. A 2006 edition of the Leominster Champion quoted Don Featherstone of the Union Products Company. A friend of mine worked at the Worcester Art Museum. He got a call from the Union Products asking if they knew anyone who could sculpt and design plastic items. They were making flat plastic ornaments at first and were looking to go three-dimensional. I took the job offer after a great fear of starving to death. Union Products specialized in plastic lawn items made using the new process of injection molding. Meg Mayer, writing for the Smithsonian Institution's Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation, wrote in 2020, "The town was a hotspot of plastic production, with 60 companies making everything from Foster Grant eyeglasses frames to Tupperware. Union Products merchandise appealed to first-time homeowners of post-World War II working-class subdivisions who were looking to add pizzazz to their property." The plastic flamingo would become by far Featherstone's most well-known work, but he told the Champion it was not the first bird that Union Products asked him to sculpt. "They asked me to work on a duck, so I went to buy a real duck to study. I named him Charlie. When I had the plastic duck done, I set him free in Cogs Hill Park." But then they asked for something more exotic. He continued, "You can't go locally and buy a flamingo. So I got some books, and one that had some good shots was National Geographic. I made the silhouette and then put on the clay, and that's how it all got started." Mayer writes that Americans had long associated the flamingo with South America and the Caribbean, the bird's native habitat. The exotic bird was also culturally connected to South Florida, a fashionable vacation destination for the wealthy for decades, where flamingos had once lived in great numbers. Jennifer Price, an environmental historian at the University of California at Los Angeles, writing in a 1999 edition of the journal The American Scholar, explains, "It was a flamingo. Since the 1930s, vacationing Americans had been flocking to Florida and returning home with flamingo souvenirs. In the 1910s and 1920s, Miami Beach's first Grand Hotel, the Flamingo, had made the bird synonymous with wealth and pizzazz. After a 1926 hurricane leveled Millionaire's Row, developers built hundreds of more modest hotels to cater to an eager middle class, served by new train lines. And, in South Beach especially, architects employed the playful Art Deco style, replete with bright pinks and flamingo motifs. Although, she notes, this was a little ironic, since Americans had hunted flamingos to extinction in Florida in the late 1800s for plumes and meat." But the success that would carry the pink plastic bird to icon status was driven by more than the association of the bird with sunny Florida. Anna Delaria, an assistant professor of art history at Miami University, writing in a 2015 edition of the journal The Conversation, explains that Featherstone's faux fowl was a product of its time. Union Products hoped that the faux coral-colored bird would offer customers a little cachet as well as tap into other trends of the day, including interest in Caribbean culture and love of all things pink. The year 1957 was the year of Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock and the '57 Chevy, of popular plastic toys like Whammo's hula hoop and the Frisbee, all icons of mid-century nostalgia. The late 1950s also witnessed the solidification of a commodity-driven suburban way of life, along with a host of new anxieties over class and status. She notes that there was an explosion of popularity in Caribbean culture in 1957. Caribbean-American pop star Harry Belafonte's album Calypso, which contained the hit single Banana Boat Song, dominated the Billboard charts in 1956. And as of 1957, Life magazine cover story attests Americans were flocking to Caribbean resorts in record numbers. And Delaria also notes the color. And then there's the color pink. Art historian Carol Ann Marling explains that in the 1950s, pink was perceived as young, daring, and omnisexual. She points out that the popular celebrities like Mamie Eisenhower, Jane Mansfield, and Elvis Presley loved to incorporate pink in their wardrobes, their bedroom decor, and, in the case of Elvis, their cars. There was also post-war life, a 2012 edition of Smithsonian Magazine interviewed Featherstone. A flamingo-friendly trend was the sameness of post-World War II construction. Units in new subdivisions sometimes looked virtually identical. You had to mark your house somehow, Featherstone says. A woman could pick up a flamingo at the store and come home with a piece of tropical elegance under her arm to change her humdrum house. Also, people just thought it was pretty, adds Featherstone's wife, Nancy. Dr. Medina Lisansky of Cornell University's College of Architecture wrote in the journal Thresholds in 1997. The market for plastic lawn art was born in the 1950s. A prosperous economy contributed to the successful growth of chain stores, which provided the nationwide marketplace for these new consumer goods. The rapid growth of home ownership and the preference for the single-family house with its front yard facing onto the road provided the theater for the display of yard art. But the popular pink plastic was not exactly universally acclaimed. Delaria notes that Featherstone's duck and flamingo ornaments sold in pairs for US $2.76 and were advertised as plastics for the lawn. They became simultaneously popular and derided in the late 1950s and remain a recognizable species of American material culture. Price writes that flamingos and lawn art ran afoul very quickly of the arbiters of culture. Our critics launched the most direct attacks. In Kitsch, the world of bad taste, Gillo de Flores singled out the new lawn and garden creatures as the archetypal image of bad taste. Oddly, this revulsion might be part of the reason that the peculiarly pigmented plastic ornament has endured to reach icon status. Lisansky opines that its multivalent and multifunctional nature is the secret to its success. The flamingo is simultaneously an object of celebration, derision, and hatred. That is, the plastic pink flamingo has always had a bit of rebellion in it. Delaria writes that, however, keeping up with the Joneses was less about outspending your neighbor than it was about conformity and maintaining appearances. The preferred look of middle-class lawns was well manicured and free of ornament, with flowers abutting the house. On the other hand, working-class consumers tended to express themselves differently, favoring loud, playful, and decorative schemes for their homes and lawn. In the 1950s, publications like Life propagated a narrowly defined definition of middle-class style and taste. So the display of the plastic pink flamingo in the 1950s and 1960s was perhaps not more unsophisticated kitsch, but rather an overt rejection of the middle-brow striving for the high-brow lawn aesthetic. The popularity continued, she explains, partly because a younger generation saw the plastic pink flamingo as a rebellion against the stay-normal pressures of post-war suburbia. Price argues that this rebellious connotation possibly reached its height with a film. When, exactly, did it become the very definition of anti-nature, the gewgaw to end all gewgaws, the ne plus ultra of lawn art? Well, it's hard to say. But by 1972, when John Waters' movie Pink Flamingos opened with a shot of the eponymous birds outside the trailer of a 300-pound woman played by the transvestite actor Divine, who vies successfully for the national title of filthiest person alive, it clearly had happened. Price also notes art trends, where artists like Andy Warhol brazenly sought out the cheap, the fake, the mass-produced, the plastic. The pop artist mocked nature to transgress the established boundaries of both taste and art. They commented on mass culture in terms that at once celebrated and critiqued it. Lisansky notes a popular t-shirt that read, "Ruin the neighborhood. Stick 'em in your yard." 2. The rebellion appealed for multiple reasons. Lisansky notes that while the flamingo has come to symbolize the definition of poor working-class taste, it has also been adopted by gay culture as symbolic of their own disenfranchisement. And yet this association, firmly set up in John Waters' 1972 classic cult film, has not precluded the ornament from being appropriated by other cultural groups, including the mid-1980s yuppie Miami Vice-watching consumers who were drawn to the flamingo as a trendy kitsch item. Easily recognized and readily lampooned, the flamingo has acquired the rhetoric of a national cultural icon. She writes that Featherstone never envisioned that his flamingo would serve as a vehicle for the expression of such diverse interests. It was certainly not designed with that in mind, nor did he ever predict its fame. The rebellion has taken several forms. Lisansky notes that Featherstone created the blue flamingo in the late 1980s for the residents of towns where the pink flamingo had been banned by neighborhood beautification committees and aesthetic watch groups. In 1996, he introduced the Snow Mingo, a white flamingo which could be purchased during the winter season when stores refused to market the warm weather pink. A person on Reddit with the screen name R.M. McSherry recalled a florist in West Lake Hills, Texas, who placed a few next to their shop on a hill. When someone complained about the eyesore and tried to file a complaint under a city signage law, he writes, "The business was understandably miffed by these complaints and the attempts by the city to intervene and tell them to remove the flamingos. So every time someone complained, they added more flamingos. Pretty soon there was a huge flock of flamingos all over the knoll. It became hugely crowded. People would drive out of their way to see the giant lawn full of flamingos, not even knowing that it was a business, openly flouting city ordinance. Westlake Hills residents became politically active about it. People loved the flamingos. People hated the flamingos. I believe there was even an election over it. And for the record, a flock of flamingos is fittingly called a flamboyance. Eventually, he writes, the business was allowed to keep the birds. By the mid-1980s, Smithsonian Magazine writes, the flamingos were transitioning from a working-class accessory to an elaborate upper-class inside joke. They furnished colorful substitutes for croquet wickets and clever themes for charity galas. The bird became a sort of plastic punchline, and at worst a way of hinting at one's own good taste by reveling in the bad taste of others. This earned a rebellion against the rebellious bird from a surprising source, John Waters, creator of the 1972 movie that cemented the singular status of the King of Kitsch. Smithsonian writes, Waters got tired of it and gradually gave away his flamingo collection. It's a classist thing, he says. People like them in a way that's not that original anymore. But the original ornament survived even that. Somehow the terribly tacky trumpeters became part of who we are. Price writes, I began to listen carefully to the stories people told me. My graduate school advisor heard a National Public Radio report on a kidnapped pair of flamingos that had sent back postcards from the Eiffel Tower. Friends had stolen the birds off lawns on drunken late-night outings in college. A New Yorker editor had a famous collection. My roommate's traveling partner had taken a flamingo named Eudora, backpacking, mountain biking, and cross-country skiing through the White Mountains, the Arctic, and the Sierras, before forgetting it one summer in a cabin at Donner's Pass. The website Visit Madison described the reason for their own pink pride. In the fall of 1979, Madison was the site of the largest known migration of plastic flamingos in recorded history. On September 4th, University of Wisconsin students and staff trudged their way to class and were stunned to see that more than 1,000 plastic flamingos had descended upon the iconic Bascom Hill in the wee hours of the morning. A prank had been pulled and a legend born. This prank-turned tradition became so popular that in 2015, the Madison Common Council declared the plastic flamingo the official bird of the city of Madison. In 2018, the Forward Madison Professional Soccer Club unveiled the bird as their official logo, and their fan club adopted the name of the flock. Since 2016, City of Leominster offers a flamingo named Featherstone as an alternative to the groundhog Puxatawny Phil, used to determine the coming spring weather by its shadow. Mayor Dean Mazzarella explained in 2016, he's holding this rat, and there's cameras all over the place everywhere, and how couldn't he see a shadow? It's impossible. On the other hand, the plastic pink flamingo is colorful, it's happy, it doesn't move, it's iconic, and people want that on the front lawn. You can join an international society for the preservation of rights of pink lawn flamingos on Facebook that seeks to develop a thriving community of like-minded individuals that share a love of Phenocopterus rubber plasticus. In many cities, you can pay a company called Surprise Flamingo to place 40 plastic flamingos on someone's lawn overnight. And one flamingo pastime is, of course, pilfering people's pink plastic from their lawns. In a strange twist, in 2006, the science humor magazine Annals of Improbable Research, which in 1986 had presented its annual Ig Nobel Prize to Featherstone on the 30th anniversary of the invention of the plastic lawn flamingo, complained that Union had removed Don Featherstone's signature from the molds. They suggested a boycott over the question of whether a fake plastic bird was authentic. Annals editor Mark Abrahams wrote, the public was never warned. The manufacturer released these altered flamingos directly into the wild without doing any environmental testing. A plastic pink flamingo with its featherstone removed is a pitiful thing, probably unable to survive in nature. And the same year, NBC News worried that in the year of its 50th anniversary, the lawn's favorite fowl might go extinct, as the venerable Union Products had stopped producing them and was going out of business. The following year, NBC was able to happily report that the species had been saved by a New York manufacturer. The original pink flamingo lawn ornament, the symbol of Kitsch, whose obituary was nearly written after its central Massachusetts manufacturer went out of business, is rising phoenix-like from the ashes and taking wing to upstate New York, they wrote. Lisansky notes that one of the most interesting things about the pink plastic lawn flamingos is that neither the Union Products Company nor the companies that were selling them through catalogs ever mounted an advertising campaign, making them something of an anomaly in consumer culture, a commercial success without the aid of commercialization. And you can still buy them today. More than 20 million have been made, fittingly roughly the population of Florida. And they've outlived their maker. Don Featherstone passed away in 2015. But why have they remained popular? What is the secret behind the enormous staying power of this very symbol of kitsch? Well, philosophy professor Robert Solomon of the University of Texas offered perhaps the most straightforward answer in a 1991 edition of the journal Aesthetics and Art Criticism. The problem with kitsch, he writes, seems to be its sentimentality. But what is wrong with sentimentality? I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.